Now's the time when you get to have your say. I hope you've got some up. We've got a question already. I'll take a couple at a time. I think we've got microphones at the back, and then I'll try and direct the questions to the most appropriate panellists. So, one over here. Please let us know who you are.
Martin Rathfelder from the Socialist Health Association. I think this debate is a bit flawed, because every democracy is flawed. I don't see how anyone can pretend that any kind of democratic system is not flawed. But I agree with Mike, that if we vote for this motion, it's effectively, we're banging an increase of democracy on its head. And one particular thing I want to bring to your attention, which people haven't talked about much, is health. There's been no democratic voice in health by elected people since 1974. It's not quite clear what involvement elected people will have from April, but at least it's a bit more than we have now. And I think we should be in favour of it.
Hello, Steve Roman. The common saying is power without responsibility. While I'm actually in favour of devolution in principle, I think the imposition by George Osborne of devolution as his thing to get into number 10 when Cameron steps down is actually a way of passing responsibility for the cuts onto Devo, Manc and the other devolutions, so it's responsibility without power.
Okay, a question over here, then we'll come back to the panel.
My name's Bernard Eckbury. I'm a member of the Greater Manchester Green Party's forum, but this is a personal opinion in question. In London, they have some kind of city-region devolution deal. It's good enough for London to have an elected assembly. Now, democracy involves people. I think the word demos is a Greek word for people. And the only element that we're talking about tonight that involves the familiar elected representative route is the elected city mayor. The cabinet, which will have a blocking majority on many of the mayor's plans, is unelected. How flawed can you be?
Neil, Ariane, let's take that first point. Health is a very undemocratic, the NHS is a very undemocratic institution. This will help to democratise it. That's surely a good thing.
I think it's important, just to take up the question broadly, is that unless we admit the flaws in the present democratic arrangement, we won't be able to mend them. And it seems to me we need to confront some of the problems we have in the democratic model before we can truly move forward. So I think it's important that we do admit the failings so we can move forward positively on that. So that's why I'm for the motion. I think there's a serious point about actually saying, hold on to it, it's not been great. We need to move forward positively by thinking again about how we have the democratic arrangements in the city.
Okay, Neil and Francesca, this is just a way for George Osborne to get his cuts through.
So I was involved in the Manchester deal, and I've been involved in some since. And there's a line written into most of them, which is that you will be no worse off for doing this deal. All the cuts happen everywhere. The places that have done a devolution deal have all got a net at least £1 billion extra, as well as all the devolution of services. So I think the arguments about devolving cuts doesn't really wash me. Is it convenient for George Osborne to put this up as a diversion? For sure, but that, I think, is a different point and doesn't in any way validate the devolution.
Yeah, please. Well, and also take that point about scrutiny.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond, first of all, to the point about health being essentially, the NHS being essentially lacking democratic input. And I think, obviously, the social and healthcare arrangements don't directly come under the remit of the mayor, but the combined authority will be part of the commissioning authority and the strategy group. So what you get from the arrangements going forwards here is more transparency and more chance to have a say, I think. So there is a gain there, although it's not under the remit of the mayor. And then the other point is in terms of the GLA. I think that there has been criticism that the GLA was rather toothless as a body, so it was fairly costly to run, but rather toothless. And I think that informed the decision here to have a cabinet that had quite powerful veto. But I think this is one of the things that we can really work on here in Greater Manchester, and that is we have over 600 local authority councillors in the region. They're all incredibly knowledgeable about their local area, about their policy specialisms. So actually, I don't think we need the equivalent of a GLA. I think we just need to look and link up with our local councillors and get them involved in scrutinising as well.
Thank you very much. Oh, you look like you want to come back on that.
Yeah, just if I may.
Just briefly.
I think there's a fundamental point about changing direction of power, and clearly any proper devolution process and a proper democratic process actually doesn't accept the drip from Whitehall and accept the archaic process in Westminster. It actually starts to buck them. Yeah? So there's something important about not accepting what we have, but create a democracy here that actually challenges it.
Ariane.
It's been perceived as something that is imposed on people, and this is not the real meaning of devolution. Devolution should be about improving the quality of democracy, bringing politics closer to people. At the moment, citizens do not have this perception, because here in Manchester, devolution is something that has been packaged in London, then by the elites, and imposed on people. And so we need to reverse that narrative of devolution if we want devolution really to work. Then the point on you hear often the argument, well, if an elected mayor is good for London, then why don't we have the same thing in Manchester, or the same and a system of devolution at the city-region level? Well, this is another important mistake, I think, in the current debate. The fact that it works in London doesn't mean that necessarily it works from the north. In Manchester, there is no need to mock London. The need here is to find a way to create a system of governance that works for Manchester and doesn't mock London. Because the fact that it works there doesn't mean that it works here. Manchester has got different needs, it's got a different type of population, it's got a different set of issues that needs to be addressed.
Okay, Mike, briefly, then I want to go back to the audience. I've got a few questions teed up.
Through you, Chair. I mean, I think the critical question that comes out for me is we're all accepting that all democracy is flawed. And I think the question that I'm havering over as I listen to that is, was this deal so flawed, in your view, that we should have refused the drip and just had nothing, refused the money? Should we have, refused devolution because people are only going to be getting involved now? Is that really what you're saying?
Okay, I keep trying to get back to answer your questions, but I think I've got to let Neil respond on that.
I don't think on this side is saying we shouldn't refuse the deal. The deal was there, it was created rapidly, it had to be accepted, and good on the elected politicians for accepting, spotting the opportunity and grabbing it. I think what we're saying is, moving forward, it was flawed by the very nature of the rapid nature of it, and moving forward we need to improve it. That, as it says, democracy is a flawed democracy. It certainly was then. We need to move forward and make it much better moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Right, I've got some more questions. I've got loads of questions. Well, why don't we start here, seeing as we're standing there?
The fact of the matter is, Mike, that Tony Blair could have backed John Prescott in the same way that Cameron has backed Osborne. You can see what happens when a Prime Minister backs one of his ministers, and Osborne has driven forward the Northern Powerhouse because he's had the support of the Prime Minister. Tony Blair did not support John Prescott, therefore John Prescott was not able to offer to the people of the North East a reasonable deal. That is why the people of the North East voted against regional government, and not because they were against regional government in principle. But we must move on. The cities are the game in town. I do share Mike's distrust of referendums. I do not think they're appropriate for structural reforms for the reasons he cited, absolutely right. And I do also sympathise with him on the question that the Conservatives put huge pressure on people to do deals, and we have to acknowledge that. But what we need to move on to now is what, to some extent, Francesca raised, which is how we actually make this mayor, when they're elected, accountable. My argument is, Francesca, we do have hundreds of councillors, but they are elected to 10 districts of Greater Manchester for other purposes. I do think we have to look at an assembly model where people are directly elected to hold the mayor and make him accountable for what he actually does.
Thank you very much. Gentleman behind you, please, and then I'll come to you next.
Thanks. I'm Dave Ellison. I'm local councillor for Manchester, so I'm an elected representative for Manchester. And I'd just like to pick up on that point, because it's an important point, really. I mean, just to underpin the devolution debate there, we've got one of the most centralised states in Europe, and in any developed country in the world. The power is vested in London at the moment, and in the civil service in London, and the elites that live in London, and the money and the powers there. This was an offer to Greater Manchester, and Greater Manchester as an economic entity wasn't packaged in London, so it's a viable entity in its own right. And it's important that Manchester takes this forward. I think it's a more sustainable model than the North West Regional Assembly. I think that was an artificial model. The city-state is a viable model, and I think it's down to the councillors to take that forward. I think the challenge, if we did have a referendum, to put to people, would you like another tier of elected councillors across Greater Manchester? I'm not sure people across Greater Manchester would have voted for that. But as we say, we've got councillors across all the districts of Greater Manchester of all different hues and parties, and it's up to them now to take that forward. And I would argue that is the corrective force that repairs the flawed democracy, and it's the job of the elected representatives to try and make it a proper democracy.
Okay, I've got a question over here.
Hello? Yeah. So, essentially, I was just wondering, before you said about how 8 out of 10 local authority reps are white men, it's sort of like a buzzword now, but how exactly do you think this Devo Manc is going to represent Manchester? I mean, even on the panel or in this room, it's like there's 4 people that could represent me out of about 50, you know, so I just wonder, how exactly do you think we can do that if we can't really do it with discuss? Yeah, so thank you.
Okay, Mike and Francesca, so the point. So I think 2 points there for you guys. One is the lack of diversity in all of this, because there's the famous picture that someone tweeted a few moments ago of the Greater Manchester leaders sitting around with George Osborne, all white, all male. You know, can Manchester use this to bring in more diversity, or is the lack of diversity in the political elite a flaw? And I think it's also that point about scrutiny. At the moment, you've got a kind of an executive board of 10 leaders working with the mayor. Can that possibly provide effective democratic scrutiny?
Can I deal with the point about diversity? And I think Francesca will do what she wants. The problem is that political parties, like businesses, reflect the power structures in society, and we have a society where the power is in the hands of white men. And I don't like that. I don't think it's in our interest. I think we'll be a better country once all of our leaders, civic, business, community, reflect the diverse society that is broadly 50% women. I mean, I just think we would. So the question is what we do about that now. And you've 2 choices. You can join David and his colleagues in the referendum campaign and create a new political movement, or you could choose to get involved in one of the elected parties. And one of the reasons I really do object to the use of the word elite, it's not too strong. I really violently object to the use of the word elite. Let me tell you, Richard Leese was elected the leader of the City Council to the Crumpsall ward of Manchester in 2012 with 2,500 votes on a 29% turnout. That same night, in this ward, in the city centre of Manchester, Joan Davis was elected to be the city centre councillor with 700 votes on a 13% turnout. That doesn't sound like an elite sport to me. It sounds like something that anyone who's interested in politics can get involved in, and damn well should do, because that's the thing that will make our community much more diverse very quickly.
Did you want to come back on that?
I wanted to respond as well, but do you want to come back first?
Yeah, if it's directly to Mike.
I don't think it's right to say that, oh, yeah, like, so-and-so trying to get into politics and they did, and it's really easy and la-di-da-di-da, because there are a ton of black and, you know, young minority ethnic people across Manchester that want to get involved in politics but don't have the means to, they don't have the education, don't have the access, and I think it's completely wrong to say to people like, oh yeah, you know, so-and-so from Crumpsall got in, like, no, it's not right, sorry.
I just wanted to respond to what you're saying, because actually it's one of the things that I've been campaigning about and trying to say is really important to get right here. And so I just want to say, I think there's several ways. You asked how can my voice get heard? And I think there's several ways that can happen. so I'll just say, in terms of the decision makers, the cabinet, I think there's got to be a way of getting more voices around the table. And I think that the 10 leaders are de facto come from the authorities, but if the deputies are appointed, that gets more voices around the table and you can have more diverse voices. So that's the decision makers. Then in terms of who scrutinises the work of the cabinet, the councillor body is still not totally representative, but it's a lot better than the cabinet. And so I think through the scrutiny mechanism, you can have more diverse voices. And then I think that the mechanisms to consult communities of interest directly, without going through the elected representatives, is really important. And that's where I think the elected mayoral model wins out over the committee of men in a smoke-filled room, or not smoke-filled room. So I do think that there are ways going forwards that it can be better. And the other thing that's really important is, in terms of dealing with social inequalities, that the actions of the going forward under Devo Manc are subject to proper equality assessments, and I think that needs to be built in, so that as policy decisions are taken, the impact on the different communities of interest across Greater Manchester are considered.
Yeah, I think what Francesca said is about, and she said it herself, ways going forward. Well, if it's not flawed, why are we going forward to these new ideas? It's flawed right now. That's what the question is on the table here. And just the whole thing about assemblies or referendum or citizens' assemblies, whatever, it seems to me that these are all great ideas. But how do those ideas get power? They get power through a proper, participative, democratic engagement with lots of people, lots of tribes across this city, from all 10 boroughs, and trans, gay, bisexual, lesbian, BME groups, different, young, old, they need to be engaged now in this process. And then we decide if we're going to have an assembly or a citizens' assembly or a referendum. That's what we need right at this moment. And because we don't see it right at this point in time, it's a flawed democracy.
Can I just add one thing? I couldn't agree more with you, Neil. And I think going back to the first point that was made here about what happened in the Northeast in 2004, so somebody argued, well, people didn't vote for it because people didn't want regional devolution, or is it because people didn't vote for it because people didn't feel that that was actually connected to them? That was, again, a module of devolution that was packaged in London with no connection whatsoever with the region. Not even the regional campaigns at the time managed to create that kind of link with the people. So, of course, that didn't work, because people don't go and vote for something that they know nothing about, and they feel that wouldn't change their life on a daily basis, on like real matters, like things that they experience, problems that they have on a daily basis. So that's why we need the type of engagement that Neil was referring to, because that's the only way to create that connection that is needed to create a sustainable system of devolution in Manchester.
So I, as Chief Returning Officer for Discuss Manchester, have now received all of the votes cast in tonight's ballot. Before the debate, the results were as follows. The votes cast indicated in the, what do we call it, not the straw poll, the exit poll. There was a straw poll. I'm now going to be giving you the result of the exit poll, as we all were, weren't we, on May the 7th. Looking forward to what that was going to bring. And it was fairly overwhelmingly undecided. The largest group were 44% of you who couldn't make up your mind. Anyway, we then counted the votes, we added them all up, and there are roughly 110 of you in the room tonight, and the numbers that we had were 53 for the motion and 55 against. However, I then gave the ballot box to the audience, to those who wanted to cast a vote, and 2 votes came in. I therefore declare tonight's debate a dead heat. Can I just thank lots of people before we go? But before I do that, can I just draw attention to our next two debates? As part of International Women's Week, we're doing two events in March. One on the 5th at the Manchester Library, where it's in the morning, it's a Saturday as you might have guessed, and it's The Boom in Manchester is Not Working for Women. And then on the 8th, in the evening, back here at the People's History Museum, doors again will open at 6 p.m. for a 6:30 start. The debate is, men are the losers now. Tickets are selling well for both of those. If you've enjoyed it, please do come along. I think it's been a terrific debate tonight. I'd just like to thank, as I have, Simon Parker for chairing the debate tonight. I'd like to thank my team as well. Don't get carried away. I'd like to thank Angeliki Stoya, who's been producing tonight's event and has done a fantastic job on her first production tonight. To Amanda Steele, who runs the floor and puts it all together, from our technical crew, and from Adam, who's been filming it, and Dave, who's been taking photographs. You've been witnessing Discuss Manchester. I really look forward to welcoming you back again, and thanks once again for being an amazing audience. Thank you very much, and good night.